Hello, my name is Nicole Brandon and I'm here with Lesley Riddoch, the author of Blossom. Lesley is a very well-renowned journalist, broadcaster, editor, and writer. Good afternoon, Lesley. It's wonderful to be here with you today. Now, first things first, given your wide array of life experiences and your abilities as a journalist, as an editor, as a broadcaster, why did Blossom take the form of a book? Why was it a book that you chose to convey the messages in Blossom out to the general public?
It's a very good question no one's asked, including me. I think the thing is, I want in a way people to immerse themselves in a lot of stories. You would have to be a master performer with a degree of time that most media don't allow you to be able to do that in any other way. The other thing is, I didn't actually have a whole series of thoughts. I mean, a book is a process. If you've ever written one, how it ends up is quite different than how it starts. So I guess all art forms are like that, actually. But with the amount of material that you're dealing with in a book, that's a lot of different stuff that's beginning to find its own path. So I actually wouldn't have had the messages of Blossom, if indeed there are such didactic things, if I hadn't written the book. So the book was a useful process. If I had known the amount of work I was going to have to do on that thing at the beginning, I would never have done it.
Well, it certainly is a unique book, full of a lot of wonderful character. And I think what gives it that character are, in fact, the characters in it, the anecdotal evidence that you supply to create that interest, which is also backed up by all your statistics and research to create quite a unique sort of atmosphere as you're reading the book, very immersive. My question is, how did you decide to weigh your anecdotal and research-based evidence against each other as you were creating Blossom? Because it's a very fine needle to thread, and you seem to have done a wonderful job with it in the book. What choices were you making as you did this?
Again, that's a very good point, because I think there's a desire to be approved of by academics. I have now lost that largely, because as soon as you move from one specialism into trying to make any general comment at all, even if you back it up with as much information as you can find, you're still on thin ice as far as the establishment is concerned. So at the beginning I was worried about that, because an academic book is expected with lots of footnotes, lots of the normal chapters, lots of things that you basically aren't maybe very expert in and feel have already been done a lot, like the economy. And by and large, that process squeezes out everything that brought you to the pen in the first place. On the other hand, if you have a book that's full of anecdotes with no kind of attempt to underpin it with statistics, you end up with something that can quite easily be dismissed and perhaps doesn't try to ram through at the end of it some of the continuities that you spot in them all. So I guess I was aware of those two polarities and just thought, I'm going to try and do this. And maybe my whole philosophy of communication is that interest comes first and importance comes second. Like, what's keeping this ceiling up at the moment is important, but it's not very interesting. And what I think needs to happen is you need to capture the interest of readers, general readers, not anoraks. And once people's interest is captured, they will then take in what's important. And it doesn't work the other way around. So each chapter starts with a story in which I hope you can become immersed. And by that point, you're in. And hopefully then you'll pick up some of the drier stuff that needs to be said in order for it to have clout.
Absolutely, and as you were saying, the form of the book giving that immersive feeling really does come through with all the chapters that you've captured and the topics that you're covering. Now, when you were choosing your topics, why did you choose the specific ones that you did? Because you must always feel that that can't be everything, that there must be something more. Do you think you captured everything, or at least everything that's important?
Oh no, I mean, absolutely not. And I was quite careful to think, I'm absolutely not dealing with, and I just put it in the foreword eventually, not dealing with the economy, not dealing with religion, not dealing with law, not on the face of it dealing with education. I was really probably working mostly from the local heroes onwards and the areas that seem to have had less scrutiny. It may be just my own outlook in life, but I see no point ever in double dunting. And what I see happening a lot is people wellying in on the same area to make minute changes, which are usually self-referencing, minute changes to our perceptions of something that is already dancing on the head of a pin. I don't feel the world needs too much more of that. I'm astonished that so few people have ever really written about housing, for example, because we live in them. And it's perhaps as an outsider to Scotland originally, it's always struck me as being such a visibly different construction as there is in any other part of the UK. So to me, this was also a working out of things that I've noticed since the age of 13, and taking the very large chance that I would not be proved mad. And it's been very satisfying to see the number of people, particularly who've come back and said about the tenements chapter, absolutely, you know, I've lived in one all my life, but I hadn't really stood back and thought what that entails. So it was probably very largely the things I've ranted on about, to be honest, for a long time. And I never planned to write 2 or 3 chapters about housing. It just grew like topsy. So I think actually it was a pretty organic process, and eventually I was knackered. And it ended.
Well, I'm glad you got tired and the book got done so that it could be published and put out onto the shelves for everyone to be reading. Now, what you mentioned about the organic way that this book came from you revives a thought that I actually had while I was reading it, that I or someone else might be able to put together something from our own experience, like Blossom, obviously with your equivalent effort, and create something that had our own life experience and our own anecdotal evidence that would back up perhaps quite a lot of what you're saying. What do you think the value of that effort would be?
I'm sure there's value in it. I'm sure nobody needs to have the same view as me, because my absolute thing in life is letting 1,000 flowers blossom. But I'm also certain that anybody, if we could get over this tyranny, actually, of the way that academic work is currently framed, anything that's regarded as serious is very much in the custodianship of universities and of an academic framework, which probably is anathema to the kind of people who really feel passion about anything. I mean, I'm doing a part-time PhD at the moment. Let me tell you, passion is a hard thing to stoke up on. On keeping these things going. And yet, to be fair, I'm sure it was doing that partly gave me the sort of, you know, some of the academic rigor to try and make sure that the thing didn't fall off the edge. So I'm sure lots of people are spending their entire lives trying to make sense of the contradictions that surround everything. Everyday life, the beauty of this country, the resources of it versus its continual ability to punch beneath its weight, blah, blah, blah. Everyone, I think, in every audience I've been speaking to, starts on side because they've all been thinking about that. But, you know, if sort of like writing a book is equivalent to, you know, being a doctor or having some form of authority over people, and it's still that kind of, you know, almost impossible to realize thing, then yes, it will seem hugely difficult to people.
Well, that definitely resonates. And on that note, if there was just one section or chapter that a person could read, you know, one chapter that they had a moment to get their hands on and to sink into with the book, which would you prefer that it was? What do you think is the most important part for people to be reading?
Yeah, boy, you're asking some good ones here. Well, I personally liked the chapter on land and egg most because it was quite funny to recall. And I did remember it in great detail because I wrote all that not long after the incident, and it sat there for a long time. But I think actually the one that I sort of, when I read it back, I think you were getting close to some very big things there, is the one after it, and I can't even remember what I called it. But this is the one that's talking about natural resources and why people are basically now so distanced from land. Why people have a habitus that makes it hard for them to break out of old patterns of behaviour. Because increasingly you can stick all the statistics you want in front of people and we're not seeing movement. You know, people can basically be sitting in a prison cell with the door open and they're still in the prison cell. There's something else needed to get people to a stage where they feel an animus or they feel an ability to really change. And unless folk get their brains around the human dynamics that keep people effectively disempowered, we will just continue to produce droves and droves of statistics that don't get to the heart of the choice people really have to make. And it's simple. Do you want a group identity, in which case shut up and put up with it? Or do you want to try and progress, in which case you will have some difficulties, and let's think about them and help them, because those people, those moments and those steps forward are the only ones worth, in my opinion, focusing on for progress.
Yes, clearly it'll be a long process before any of this comes to fruition, if indeed it does. Your introduction, in fact, makes clear that the September referendum's outcome won't necessarily tackle the systemic features of life in Scotland, which seem to be holding people back. Do you imagine, though, that a yes vote or a no vote will have a major impact on what these next steps will be?
Yes, for sure. I mean, I personally will be voting yes, but I'm very conscious that this is a group moving forward, and I get very annoyed at people who would kind of weaken that collective forward movement. So I'm quite happy to go at the pace of the most hesitant, because that's the average, and that's the Nordic way of looking at it, by the way. That's a feminine way of looking at it. I care about where the average person is in this, not where the elite or the forward runners are. So that's one thing. But sure, the polls at the moment suggest a no vote. To move from that to yes in the space of what now, 6 months, would mean there's been some incredible amount of political and social activity in Scotland, and you cannot put that all back in a sock. I mean, I think the amount of questioning and wondering and imagining about Scotland that's happened in the last year surpasses anything in my lifetime. And that only happened because an opportunity or a possibility arose. So for sure, you can only imagine that becoming exponential once you're in an independent state. There's, you know, all bets are off. Now, the only caveat is that in those maelstroms, those who are practiced in stealthy stealing of power are fastest off the block. And my worry is that many people seem to think that with one bound we shall be free, and that all rational things will then come to pass, and that people will be nice and it'll all be fine. And there's no evidence that is the way it works. People have to keep their thoughts high, and they need to keep thinking that the transition is like having a baby. Delivering the thing is half of it. It's less than half of it in the end. It's the business of what you do in the early years that matters most. And that is very often where people take their eye off the ball, because they're happy to think they've reached the promised land. So there's plenty that needs to be done.
Okay. Well,
but I want to say one thing, which is, it's perfectly true that over the piece, it takes a long time for people to transition from one kind of outlook, because we've been mired in a lot of this for centuries. On the other hand, there's a stage where people begin to get, it's almost a form of grandiosity, that Scotland has got peculiarly difficult problems that will take forever to undo. Actually, some things are relatively simple, and building them up to be insurmountable and real beard pullers is a bad move. So, for example, on the land thing, sporting estates don't pay business rates. We could fix that within 2 months. We could also fix the situation where the eldest son is legally able to inherit all of the land in a sporting estate. We're the only country left in the developed world that does that. That's an act of parliament. So there's plenty of things which actually could be done pretty quickly and would show people the intent, a direction of travel. And it's astonishing how once the structure begins to change and people feel permission to bring their whole selves into life, and you begin to harness much more energy than you were at the start.
Absolutely. And I think the examples of what we've talked about today and what we've read in Blossom, your anecdotal and your research evidence, definitely says a lot for the idea that there is more to be hoped for in Scotland's future, and definitely more to be achieved. And I hope that whichever way the vote goes, that there will be plenty in Blossom that people can keep coming back to and engaging with over the course of Scotland's future. Thank you, Lesley.
Thanks very much.